Alright, hi everybody, how's it going? And welcome to another video. I'm here in the famous town of Dodge City, Kansas, and I'm here actually at the 150th anniversary of the founding of the city. It was founded in 1872. Before that, it was called Buffalo City. There were a lot of buffalo hunters there. That's where Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson were said to have met. They were hunting buffalo on the plains in the frontier, and they met at this town around this time. And it was around this time that they began hunting buffalo. So the buffalo were then, the skins of the buffalo were brought here to the general store founded by Charles Rath. And they would bring these pelts in. They would get $1 to $3 for these buffalo pelts. These buffalo hides were then sent on train to the east. So it was said that in 1 year alone, 250 buffalo pelts were brought to this general store. So they would get money for these pelts. So I did want to mention that. I also wanted to mention that at around this time in 1872, a Lakota Indian chief, Lakota Sioux Indian chief by the name of Spotted Tail, came here, and he warned the inhabitants to not go below the Arkansas River because, according to a treaty of 1867, if they went below and hunted, they would be violating that treaty. Well, someone in the town said, if I see an Indian, I'm going to shoot the first one I see. And apparently, Spotted Tail was still in town at the time, so the owner of this general store hit him and managed to sneak him out by putting him in like a suit and a tie, because he came, wearing a headdress and all that. So he snuck him out of town just in time. Okay, so I did want to talk about that. Here's a saloon. There were a lot of saloons in town. Now, this town is most famous, as you know, for its lawmen, Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson. An individual by the name of Charles Bassett, I believe his name was the first sheriff of this county, and the first sheriff of this county, and he wanted to beef up the law enforcement because it was a very lawless town. A restaurant owner had been killed. There was a big outcry. There were a number of reformers that lived in the north part of Dodge City, which had a very different feel to it. It wasn't as, there weren't as many, cowboys there. In fact, as far as I know, not too many went to that part. So it really was seen as like the civil part of Dodge City. It's where the shop owners lived. It's where the people who had money lived. And what happened with Dodge City was the buffalo were hunted to near extinction. And as this happened, they had established the Santa Fe Railroad through here. So then it became a cow town. So it started out as like a buffalo hunting town and then transformed into a cow town. And what had happened is, before this was a cow town, the cow towns were further east of here, in towns like Newton, Kansas, and Abilene, Kansas, which is very famous as a cow town. The cowboys would take the cattle from Brownsville, Texas, along the Chisholm Trail, and they would come here. And then from here, they were loaded onto trains. From my understanding, they were then shipped east, particularly to Chicago, I know, because you had the stockyards of Chicago, and that's where a lot of them were brought to. So here, as you can see, there's hardware stores, dry goods, clothing. They had established a dry goods From what I understand, I believe the dry goods store was established by someone from Austria-Hungary, and he had come out here and he established that and became quite wealthy doing it. Here's the drugstore. The doctor of Dodge had come from St. Louis, practiced medicine, from what I understand, for about 58 years. Here's a saloon. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of saloons in Dodge. A restaurant over here, actually. This is a grocery store, another saloon, barber shop. So they got the right idea by the fact that there are a lot of saloons. By 1875, they made a law where you couldn't bring guns into town. That wasn't rigidly enforced. It was kind of a loosely enforced law, but they did make it a law. I know there was an incident where the brother of the brother of Bat Masterson was killed in Dodge City. And I was trying to enforce the law. There were some cowboys that were being rowdy, and they had fired at each other. Bat Masterson's son, I believe his name was Ed, if I'm not mistaken. Bat Masterson's, brother, who I believe his name was Ed, was shot and had been killed. And then Bat Masterson avenged his death. So there's a lot on Bat Masterson. He was a very colorful character. Got involved, actually, in being a timekeeper for boxing later on. Some of the biggest heavyweight boxing matches of the day he partook in. And oddly enough, so did Wyatt Earp, which, even though those guys were different, there were a lot of ways they were very similar. They both had come from the East. They both had a lot of brothers who were also in law enforcement, and they both got involved in boxing later on. But maybe if I do a video on Wyatt Earp, I could talk about his controversial refereeing that he had done, where it's believed he fixed a heavyweight title fight. And that lost him a lot of popularity. So much so that it wasn't until his biography came out in 1831, a few years after his death, that his legend began to grow again. And obviously, there's been a lot of movies. This is Dodge City. Probably know it from the popular TV show Gunsmoke, which I think was one of the more popular TV shows on at the time. Maybe one of the most popular TV shows ever. And from what I understand, it was on for like 20 years or more than 20 years. But in Gunsmoke, because that takes place in Dodge, that sort of gave rise to that quote, "Get out of Dodge," which Matt Dillon would frequently say on the show. So that's where that term comes from, get out of Dodge. So tomorrow, I myself will be getting out of Dodge. But here's a house. This house is owned by a wealthy cattle rancher who I believe was from Oklahoma, but came here. He had a huge ranch in Oklahoma, but he had stayed here. He had this house built. See if I could get a good shot of it. There's the blacksmith and wheelwright shop right there. So anyways, here I am. Like I said, it's the 150th anniversary of the founding of Deadwood. And yeah, it's interesting to actually see, what it looks like. If you do come, they do put on reenactments here, reenactments of shootouts. And there's also, a museum, of course. And the museums are pretty good. In fact, a lot of the places I just walked past are now museums. But you could go into the saloon. The saloon very much looks like an Old West saloon. In fact, even the bartender looks like someone right out of an old Western bar, you know, with the curled mustache and all that. Really looks like that. And funny enough, I went in there. I didn't get whiskey or beer. I got a Diet Coke. So look kind of funny, my getting a Diet Coke at a place that looked like that. But anyways, this is my video here in Dodge City. If you watched this video, as always, I thank you for watching. Have a good night.